All right. In the last chapter, I talked about, or gave an introduction to Substance Painter by doing the cockpit, and I'd like to continue with that and do some more detailed work and more advanced work in texturing the outside of the plane. One thing I would recommend is if you go into your display settings, you can change the HDRI that's used to light your model. And I really recommend having like a base, just a base white color. So if I just create a base color here that's white, and the whole idea here is to make sure your lighting is not biased. So here I have a white model. And you can see that if I change my HDR lighting, maybe cut it back a little bit, it doesn't blow out. You can see how green tint that is, very orange tint. So this is really going to change how your colors look. So I'd recommend picking one that A, lights your model without a bias, and B, lights your entire model. Like some HDRIs have darkness on the bottom, like a horizon line, so that makes it hard to see underneath the model. This Gdansk one seems to be fairly unbiased. I got a nice white lighting all the way around, and then you can change the exposure here to something less if you think it's blown out, and if you shift and hold the right mouse button and then drag your mouse left and right, you can change the rotation of the HDRI. So if one side of your model is not lit, you can spin the sun around and look at the other side. All right, so that's the first thing, is just make sure your lighting is decent before you start putting colors down. And the last thing, we used just an aluminum texture that came with Substance Painter. In this one, I want to show you how to make your own. So these textures are great. You can find them online, Adobe and other third-party sites, but sometimes you want to make your own. So I want to organize the project by materials. I'm going to create folders for each of the materials. So I'm going to create one for rubber, one for metal, and one for painted surfaces. And I'm going to just take this one here and just stick it into metal for now. And the reason I put them into groups is we can put masks on the collections here, and then those masks apply to everything within those collections. It's just a nice way to easily group things together based on materials. So I'm going to make this a metallic material, which means I need to go over here to the property side. And more than just color, I also need the metal channel, and you need to move that all the way up to the right. Now we created a very light metal, and I want to make this kind of an oxidized aluminum. So I'm going to take it kind of down to the middle there. And that gives us a very even coated material. It's not very interesting. There isn't a lot of interest going on there. So if I add roughness to this, I can drop in textures in here. So if I go to textures and type in noise, for example, and take actually maybe the black and white noises, BNW. So black and white spots 3, for example. I can just take that, drag it into my roughness channel, and you can see how that applies it across the model and makes it more interesting. Now you can, of course, scale it to change how the scale affects it. You can change from UV projection to, often people like to use triplanar. A triplanar is going to create a very even application across the entire model, as if it's applied kind of externally to the whole thing, versus the UV projection is going to project against each UV island individually. Now in this case, I want to do that. I want to use the UV because I want each panel to have a little bit of personality different than the others, because the panels are going to have maybe a little different wear, maybe they're machined differently. So we want changes in that. An alternative way to do something like roughness is to actually create fill layers. And this is going to create a more complex layer, set of layers for your channels. And this is more than just roughness. You can do this with any of the channels, but in this case, I'm just going to show you with roughness. So I could add a fill layer here. So if I right-click and say Add Fill, and over here, just choose roughness. All right, that's going to override the previous roughness. And now I can take this black and white spots, drag it in here. We're basically where we were a second ago with that roughness. However, I can now right-click on this again, Add Fill, and maybe I want to add clouds. Maybe I'll take the clouds 3 and I'll throw that on roughness as well. I'm just going to only choose the roughness. So you can see how that overrode the underlying fill layer, and now we can start mixing together using these mix modes. And you can kind of play around with these to decide what you want. Multiply is going to create, it's going to multiply this fill times that fill. Normal is going to be one. Oh, you know what? I'm also doing it wrong. There we go. Now it'll work better. So multiply, it's going to multiply and make things darker, which makes them shinier. Sometimes overlay works, sometimes screen. So you can just kind of play with these. So, for example, screen is going to create a very matte metallic finish. I'm just going to leave it as maybe overlay. And then you can further dial back the effect here. You want to make sure you're in the right channel here, by the way. That's a mistake I made a second ago. This selection here affects what these relate to. So right now, since I'm in the roughness channel, when I adjust these options here, I'm affecting just the roughness channel. And I can dial back on how much that multiply or overlay or whatever affects the underlying. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time fine-tuning this. If I wasn't real happy with this, I could spend a lot of time kind of tweaking it. But I wanted to give the idea of how you would create your own metallic texture. And I'll probably spend some time offline tweaking this, but at least you get the idea there. So that is our metal texture. Next thing we want to think about is paint. And I like to put paint on. There's two ways to paint. You can either positively paint or negatively paint. So a positively painting is if you create, say, a paint layer. I'm just going to stick this up inside our paint area. And if I'm on the brush, which is the one on the keyboard, the top row of your keypad, or on top row of your keyboard, you hit the one key, that's the brush. And now I can choose my channels that I want. In this case, I'm just going to choose color, and I can just paint on here directly. And you can choose your brushes down here. So if I wanted to do maybe a soft brush, basic soft brush, and I can use the left and right brackets, square brackets, to size my brush. You can also further size it up here if you need more refinement. But now I can just paint on the plane. Right? And this is what I would consider kind of positive painting. I'm painting with the brush. And you notice that if I look down here at the channels, I'm only painting in color. So the underlying metal and roughness here is coming through. Like this, this paint is not. That's why we kind of have this kind of metallic looking paint. If I added roughness and metal to my paint here, and I start painting, you can see how the paint looks different now, because now the paintbrush is painting not just the diffuse color, but also painting the roughness and the metallic value. So we've got metallic set to nothing, and then we've got roughness kind of a dull color, which is why we get a different kind of color based on how many channels we have. So that's positive painting. And there are times when that's good, but sometimes you want to do what I call like negative painting, and that's where we flood an entire area with a color, and then we kind of subtract away from it using a mask. So in this case, I want to create a fill layer, and for colors, I've decided I want to do a plane that looks kind of like this. Not specifically this plane, but playing with this kind of gray blue camouflage on it. And in the last video, I showed you that I had been picking my colors from this IPMS Stockholm website. And instead of constantly going back and forth here or clicking on the links, it took a few minutes, and I created a little set of swatches in Photoshop so that I can easily pick my colors. I'm just going to move this off to the left on my monitor so I can choose those colors. So now I have this fill layer, and let's say I wanted to put on that light blue underside, and I wanted to apply it to everything. So I can click on the color here, and if I click and hold that eyedropper and then drag it over to my palettes, you can see how it changes as my mouse hovers over those different colors. So now I'm hovering over the Hellblau color, and it's going to apply it to the whole model. So I can just call that, Hellblau, and now it's applied to the whole model. And now I can add another color on top of that. I'm going to create another fill. I'm going to make this the graugrün color, the gray-green, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to click my eyedropper, and I'm going to pick that, and you can see how it applies over the whole thing. Now the nice thing about these layers now is that I can add masks to these. So in this case, I right-click on this, and I click Add Black Mask. The black mask is going to hide everything underneath. So there's black masks and white masks. The black mask hides everything underneath. A white mask doesn't hide anything underneath, and then you need to reveal things that are below it. So in this case, I've hidden stuff below. I've hidden the entire gray-green layer, and now what I can do is I can reveal that by using my brush while the mask is selected, right? Not the color, but the mask. So I've got the mask selected. I hit one on the keyboard so that I'm using a brush, and I've picked this brush right now. And now if I quote-unquote paint, I'm not actually painting a color. I'm actually painting black or white on the plane and then revealing what's underneath. Right? And the nice thing about this is you don't have to worry about the leading paint or anything, and you're leaving, and your paint fills everything. You don't have to worry about, sometimes when you're painting an edge, sometimes you can't really get it inside of an edge. When you use this fill bucket, it fills everything, so you're not worrying about little gaps and stuff. Another nice thing about this is if you're doing a leading edge like this, and you're trying to get a nice kind of line there, but you go too far down on the bottom, you can always hit the X key, and you can look up here on the right, I can toggle between black and white, and I can erase stuff. And if I accidentally go too far, I don't have to worry about reloading the color of my brush or anything. I just have to hit X, and I can, basically unhide or hide the colors there again. So it's a kind of very non-destructive way of painting. It definitely throws paint everywhere, so you don't have to worry about brush strokes so much or getting into crevices. And you can also do, there's spotted camouflage on the side of this, so instead of being big lines, I can kind of do little squiggles. You can do all your basic camouflage stuff just by exposing what's below, and then you can just create other layers of paint to do exactly the same thing and just expose them as well. It's a nice way to paint. You can also exclude large sections of your model using a mask. So for example, if I wanted the spinner to be white, I could create a new layer, and for this I'm going to use the white that's on my palette, so I'm choosing that white, and it applies it to the whole model. but I only want it on the spinner. So in this case, I can apply a black mask. Sorry, wrong button. I'll just get rid of that. Apply a black mask. It's going to hide everything. And now if I hit the 4 on the keyboard, I'm in the mask selection mode. And up here I have options. I can choose to fill things just by triangles. And you can see it fills a little triangle. And again, this is dependent upon the color here, which you can switch using the X key. You can toggle it. In this case, white is going to expose target the color below, and X is going to hide it. So you can cover it back up. The square is going to fill polygons. So sometimes that's useful. But what's most useful is either by object. So it's going to do the whole object, or by UV chunk. So UV chunk is going to take all the way up to your UV seams, which can be very useful if you want to have really sharp edges along UV seams. In this case, though, I want to do by the entire object because I want to get everything. So you can see how I can quickly just block out the entire nose there just in white. Right? And I get nice crisp lines. And for example, the wingtips also are white, so I can quickly select those. And even faster, if I remembered to turn on mirroring, it would have selected both sides. You can also click and drag. So I'm deselecting those. Now I'm reselecting those. So instead of just clicking on stuff, that way if you have lots of stuff together, you can just kind of drag across them and get them. So that's the basic technique for creating fill layers and masks. What I think I'll do now is I'll kind of clean this back up to the starting point, and then I'll go back and I'll properly paint the camouflage on here. And once we got the basic paint down, I'll go on to the next step of adding some more details and weathering and that kind of thing. All right, I will see you in a little bit. All right, I'm back for another tip. I've got the gray-green base color down for the camouflage, and I need to put the gray-violet basically in the same place. Now, it took some time for me to mask all this out, particularly along the leading edges of the wings, and along the edges back here. There's no reason not to reuse the mask for this color for the new color, so you can reuse your masks. So if I create a new fill layer, and I'll call this one gray violet, and I'll use my palette over here to set the color. So now that's the color that I've applied to the whole model. You notice how nicely these masks just automatically work, that white and yellow. But what I can do is I can create another black mask here. And then if I right click on the other mask, the original mask, and I say copy mask, and then right click on this mask and insert into mask, paste in the mask, you can see that the masking that I took all the time to do on this one, on this first color, is now perfectly copied into this one. And now I can further customize it. So I can add another paint layer, not a paint layer, sorry. I can add a new paint layer where I can just take away, for example, the wing camouflage where I want to have the contrast between the violet and the green. So I've got my new layer. I'm still using the old one. This one and this one are exactly the same, but now I'm going to create a refined version of that. And I'm going to got my soft brush, scale it down a little bit. I'm going to hit the X key, so I'm painting black. And now you can see I'm removing the violet gray, the gray violet, from the top and exposing the gray green underneath. And the nice thing about this is, A, I spent less time duplicating my masks, but B, that leading edge mask for the two colors is exactly the same, so I don't have to redo this whole piece here. All right, and that's just something to think about when you're laying down your big masks, right? Because like in the other parts of the project in Blender, you start big and work your way small. Same idea here when you're doing paint. You want to paint top down, big to small. So I'm actually going to delete this because I don't want it to be symmetrical, but I just wanted to stop a minute and show you that you can copy one mask to another to save you some time. All right, I'll see you in a bit. Well, I think I'm done laying down the base colors. At this point, I want to talk a little bit about consolidating some of the channels to make it easier to kind of manipulate them from a more centralized location. So what I mean by that is each of these fill levels have all the channels on them. I'm going to hit Alt and Color and just isolate the color channel for each one of these guys. And we'll control the other channels from a separate fill layer. And that way we can do it globally across the whole airplane. So there's the plane as it is, just the color, and the other layers down here are turned off. If I add another fill layer up here and just use roughness, so I'm going to alt click on rough, so I only have the rough channel. And if I go into my textures, and let's look for noise, and maybe take the black and white spots too, and drop it into roughness, you can see that right away that makes the paint look very spotty. Now you can isolate the channels by going up here and clicking on the channel you're interested in and see exactly what it looks like. Black's going to be shiny, white is going to be very flat color. You can change how it's projected. We can go to triplanar if you want a more unified look across the plane, maybe change the scale if that's what you're looking for. In this case I want to go with UV layout because I want the panels to be accentuated a bit. So I'm going to get some hard lines by mapping the roughness across the panels. The problem with this is there's too much of a difference between the darks and the lights. We got really black, really white, and if we look at the material, it ends up having like really glossy spots and really flat spots. So we can fix that by adding a level. So we right-click on the fill layer and then add level, and then over here choose your channel, looking at roughness, and we're just going to kind of crunch these two things here, these sliders, and it's going to bring down the blacks and the whites. It's a little closer together, and we can look back at the material and see if that's doing any better. And it certainly is less of a contrast. And these are all non-destructive, so later on we decide we want more or less. We can add more or less. And the nice thing about putting it here is when we start adding decals and stencils, we don't want to be controlling the roughness of all of them, individually. We want just a global way to manipulate the roughness of the plane, from just literally just one set of sliders. It's very convenient. All right, I also want to add a couple more materials here. So I have a rubber folder, and Substance Painter comes with some rubber materials. And there's a tire rubber tire. I can just drop that into that folder. And I've got this folder on top so that it just puts it on everything. I don't have to worry about the other masks. I can add a black mask that'll hide everything, and then I can just hit the 4 on the top row numbers, and I can, with the mirror modifier turned on, I can select my tires as objects. That'll select both of them, and then I can select my tail wheel and our tires. We got rubber on our tires. All right, and I also want to add a gunmetal for the cannons and machine guns. I'm going to create another folder and call it gunmetal. Put that up top. Do the same thing. Now this is one I had to import. I've shown you how to import things before. I think I got this from the Substance Painter website. If not, there are lots of places that have, like I said, third-party materials you can download. But this one is pretty good for guns, blue metal. The only thing I don't particularly like about it is the scratches. They're a little too much. So you can just delete if you want, or highlight. You can either turn it off, or you can just simply delete it if you don't want it. And then if these colors weren't good enough for you, if you wanted to change the scale or something like that, you could change any of these parameters. You could go into the base, change these, change the wear, change the roughness. This is all customizable to what you need. And I might do that offline, but for right now I'm just going to leave it as is. And I'm going to add a black mask to the gunmetal folder. I hit 4 on the keyboard. I can select the guns, and for the gun barrels, I don't want the whole thing. I just want that part, because this bit is a little bit of fabric on the gun fairing. And that should be it for the gunmetal. Now I want to think about exposing some of the underlying metal, some of the aluminum. So inside, we have all of our paints in here, and I've grouped all of the paint inside of one area. So I can add another white mask here, add a white mask, and that's not going to hide anything because it's a white mask. But now if I click on the mask and I hit on the 4 key, I can start taking things away from the paint mask. So hit X to toggle my selection, either black or white, and I don't think I want, because I'm doing it odd angles there, I don't want mirror on, but you can see how I'm just removing these things from the mask. And if I turn on the aluminum channel, you can see that the metal is being exposed. Right? We can do that anywhere we want to have the underlying aluminum exposed by default, as a material in itself. And later on we're going to add some generators that'll create some edgeware, and then we'll even paint some of our own edgeware, just like I did with the cockpit, so we can expose that underlying metal. I want some of these lines here to be aluminum. I want this one to be aluminum. Now sometimes it's kind of hard to see what you're doing. In that case, what I might do sometimes, just to make it easy for me to see what's masked and what's not, you can either go and look just at the mask, in which case you're going to see things that are black are masked out. Sometimes that's hard to see because there's really no depth here. They're very silhouette type things. Another way I sometimes use to figure out what I'm masking and what I'm not masking is I'll put something ridiculous here, or some fill layer, maybe right there, and I'm just going to do color on it, and I'll make it some color that isn't anywhere else in the model. And that way it shows up easily. And I know that now that whatever is below here is going to show up as that purple color, and I can go quickly in and mask off things so that I start seeing that purple color. All right, so either way works. Sometimes this is easier though, because you're not dealing, you still have some shadows and stuff you can take advantage of in this method. I really should have that on. Just wasting time otherwise. All those would be metal, that's metal, or bare metal. And you just go around and figure out what you want to have exposed. That's going to go, actually that's a rubber line, so I want to go back to rubber, and I want to go to, I'm on the mask, rubber mask, and I hit switch to the X. Let's go back to 1 and see how this looks. Yeah, I actually think these might be brass on the thing. I'll add those later as a different metal, but basically the same process goes on there. And let's see, we could turn that off. We don't need it right now. And you can see that the aluminum is showing through where we masked it off on those parts. And I'm going to add more. I'm going to make the center of the prop also metal. Another thing you might be noticing is this weird coloration. It looks more speckled than it did a little while ago. And that's because this layer is really not just, we're not going to make this just roughness. We're going to call it rough and metal. So right now there's a roughness channel in here, but the metal channel from the aluminum is the only channel that Substance Painter has to really use down here for metal, so that metal is then percolating up through the stack. We can override it by adding a metal channel to that fill layer, and then the paint becomes non-metallic and has a global roughness that we can manage just from one spot. I think this video is getting kind of long, so what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to end this one here, and in the next one we'll talk about putting decals on, so national insignia, stencils, that kind of thing. All right, I will see you there.